Okay, hope you're all doing well. Um, I guess I'll start with attendance tonight and get that out of the way. All right. Afzal, Nabia, Ahmed, Rima, Omar, Ali, Chastity Aquino,
Here.
hello. Nita Aslam,
I'm here.
hey, Nita. Natalie Ben Yosef,
Here.
hello. Ariana Besesser, Alicia Brooks, Anthony Castaneda,
I'm here, Professor.
Jerica Cepeda, Alea Charlton, Glory Christian, Glory, Crystal Clark,
Here,
Elizabeth
Professor.
Crystal,
Crystal's here. Yeah.
nice. Elizabeth Desai,
I'm here.
King Yan Ding, King Yan Ding, Vladimir Duval Saint.
I'm here.
Okay, Vladimir.
Professor,
Yes,
have you called Jerica?
Jerica Cepeda. Oh, you know what? I might have accidentally skipped you. But have no fear. I just marked
And
it.
also, Professor, can you go for Alicia Brooks? The link didn't, I guess you didn't let me
Okay.
in.
Okay,
Thank you.
Alicia, I got you. No problem. Okay. Okay, so Alea Charlton, Soraya Chattery,
I'm here, Professor.
Soraya, okay.
Yeah, it's Soraya.
Thank you, Soraya. Glory Christian, Crystal Clark, Elizabeth Desai. I have Elizabeth here. King Yan Ding. Is King Yan here? No. Okay, I have Vladimir. Benvante Fogler.
I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Jordan Glenn Williams. Dipu Hossein. Zinan Wang.
Here, Professor.
Okay, Zinan. Tanya Ingram. Prince Andy. Yilin. Karen Liu.
I'm here.
Karen. Eman Malik.
I'm here. Also, Yelin's here too. They're in the chat.
Who?
Yelin.
Yilin. Oh, okay. Thank you. Eman, I have Joshua.
I'm here, Professor.
Closer. Feel you still want to drop out or you change your mind?
I might just be taking a break and coming back.
Well, I think there's rewards to finishing college, but I understand getting frustrated with it, but I think there's still payback to finishing. So, that I'm just saying that for everyone's benefit also. People who finish earn more. You know, and I think that's true still. I know it's true still. So, you know, consider that. Okay, Patrice McIntyre.
I'm here, Professor.
Okay. Alexandra Melendez.
I'm here, Professor.
Hello. Afra Noman.
I'm here.
Okay, hello. Deanna Pierre-Louis.
I'm here.
Hello. Guoming Kwan.
Professor, I'm here.
Yeah, Guoming, thank you. Oh, I left out Miftal Proga. Miftahul Proga. Okay, Asif. Raman, Rafikar, Raman,
Hi, Professor, I'm here.
yeah, Rafikar. Gotcha. Safayet. Robert Rubino. Robert, Mohammed Sarwar.
I'm here.
Okay. Lauren Segal.
Here.
Whoa. Margarita Sherback.
Hello, Professor. I'm here.
Okay, Margarita, gotcha. Hafsa Siddiqui. Hafsa. Giovanni Simon. Giovanni. Chanel Sterling. Janitin Surawardi.
Professor.
Okay, Janitin.
Here.
Thank you. Sanzita Tanya. Israel Tlatelpa.
I'm here, Professor.
Yes, sir. Gotcha. Makita Tony.
Here, Professor.
Okay. Abigail Tuachi.
Here.
Okay, gotcha. Ghazi Uden.
I'm here, Professor.
Okay, Ghazi, gotcha. Ashley Vasquez. Ashley. Yoland.
Present, Professor.
Great.
Professor, I'm here. Ashley Vasquez.
Oh, Ashley. Okay, gotcha.
Thank you.
Welcome. Joyce Wu Z.
Here, Professor.
Okay. Hao Rong Jian.
Yes, I'm here, Professor.
Thank you. Xiao Hua Yan.
I'm here. Hello.
Thank you. I heard, thank you. Charles Ruan.
Here.
Okay, Charles. Okay, now there was some kind of message for me or something. I just want to double check that. Strange, I don't see any messages. All right.
Hey, Professor, I know I think I
Okay.
came in probably after you got my
No
you called
problem.
my name out.
Yeah, okay. What's your last name again?
Isaac, Prince
Isaac.
Andy Isaac.
Okay. All right, Prince Andy.
I also came in late. Hafsa Siddiqui.
Okay, gotcha. All right, I'll call up the people I have not here, and if anyone's here, let me know. Mohammed Afzal, Nabia Ahmed, Rima Akhtar, Omar Ali.
Professor Rima Akhtar is in the chat. She's here.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not seeing the chat here for some reason. Strange. I usually see that. All right. So I'm sorry, Eamon, who were you saying?
Rima Akhtar.
Doctor, okay. Got it.
And Ping Yan Ding is also here too.
Ding, okay. I had Ding. I had Ding.
Okay.
So Afzal, Ahmed, Ali, Alea Charlton, Glory Christian, Benvante Fogler, Jordan Glenn Williams, Dipu Hossein, Zinin I have, Prince Andy I have. Okay. Asif Rahman and Safayat Rahman, Robert Rubino, Giovanni Simon, Chanel Sterling, Sanzita here. Okay, so those people I don't have. All right. So tonight we're going to finish up a little bit on the stuff we were talking about motivation last time, and we'll get into some stuff on group behavior and teams. So we're kind of in the heart of what I would consider OB territory. The early part of the class, a little bit more like psychological, like stuff like perception and personality. That's it's part of OB, but it's a little more psychological in orientation, stuff that involves group behavior and motivation. Those things are sort of the center of OB and what I think differentiates it from just ordinary psychology. So basically, we were talking last time, I'll just review a few things. We talked about the classical theories like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and McClellan's need theory. We talked about content-based theories that your book says are contemporary. I said they're not any newer than the so-called classic theories, but that's unimportant. And basically self-determination theory includes stuff like cognitive evaluation theory, that the idea that you can't use incentives, extrinsic rewards or incentives are unimportant or actually harmful, that they reduce intrinsic interest and so reduce motivation. As I said, I don't put a lot of weight on that, but they're popular theories. There a lot of people write about them. I don't think too many people use them, but no matter. The idea of self-concordance theory, it's just a fancy way of saying that you need to find work goals that align with your interests. And that's why I do the informational interviewing exercise that you should be working on and contacting people in industry, because you have to figure out if the jobs you want to do are really what you want to do, if it really fits your interest. Regulatory focus theory, so people have focus on things like promotion or achievement or prevention of loss. We talked about context-based theories that those included reinforcement theory or operant conditioning, the idea that you learn through experience, that you learn because you get your behavior is either reinforced yes or no. And Albert Bandura's advance on that social learning theory, well, to me, an advance. Not everyone would agree that it's an advance, but a lot of people think it is. And basically, social learning theory says that there are three poles. There's like a triangle. So instead of just behavior, consequences, learning, you've got behavior, the environment, and consequences. So you learn from others as well as from the consequences of what you do. All right, so process-based theories we talked about as well, and that's stuff like goal-setting theory, expectancy theory. I talked about those. And you should know all that. That's all good stuff to know about, and it'll be on the exam. So today I'm going to get into, okay, I think I also mentioned last time self-efficacy theory. Self-efficacy just means that somebody believes themselves capable of doing something. So people who have self-efficacy have a high level of confidence, and they believe themselves to be competent. They're people who feel that way are more likely to succeed simply because they're going to act. You can't succeed without action. So the more you do, the more you succeed. Of course, you're going to fail a lot of times, but you can't succeed without failure. So basically, you want to work hard at trying things, and some will work, but most won't work. And it's very hard to know exactly which one will work. So you have to try different things and then pick the one that succeeds. Equity theory, the idea of equity theory is just, I'm going to put this on the screen. You don't think I talked about that last time. So equity theory is just the idea that we make social comparisons with other people, and we want to feel as though we're getting rewarded to the same degree that we're putting in effort. So equity theory suggests that we compare our inputs and our outcomes to everyone else, to the people around us. When I say everyone else, I mean like the people we work with, our coworkers and people we know. It could be people outside the firm, but you know, and HR deals with that. When I teach HR, I talk about two kinds of compensation analysis. The internal equity, so when people make internal comparisons, you have what's called job evaluation. You compare all the jobs to each other, you assign them points, and the jobs with the most points, because they're the hardest or the most difficult to learn, or they have the most responsibility, require the most skill. There are a number of reasons why jobs will be paid more. Usually, like the more responsibility, so the higher up the totem pole you are, the more you get paid. You know, the CEO gets the most and so on. However, that's not always going to be true. There are certain times when competencies are more important than responsibility. One example that comes to mind is the case of an inventor who comes up with a new product. Let's say somebody comes up with a drug. You know, of course, if they're an employee and they've assigned the rights to the company, then that's different. They'll probably get paid very well, but the company's too hierarchical usually. Most companies are too hierarchical to dispense with that. But if the employee doesn't sign over the rights, then they can easily get paid more than the top manager, you know, if it's a good drug. If they actually discover like a drug that works well. And you know, the same is true in movies, you know, sports. Often people with more competencies get paid more than the top executives. So, you know, somebody like Daniel Day-Lewis comes to mind. There's, you know, a bunch of them. You know, lots of athletes get paid more than the management does because of their competency. And there are a number of areas where that might be true. So basically, though, people make comparisons. So, you know, let's say you're Daniel Day-Lewis and you want to know whether you're paid fairly or not, you know that your performance in Lincoln was very good. So you have a very high outcome. You look at the outcome. I don't know what he was paid for that, say it's 20 million or something. So you take the ratio of the outcome to the input. Let me change this on me. So Where's the line? Okay, this is the line. So you take the ratio of the outcome for you versus the outcome for the comparison. So, someone like Daniel Day-Lewis, who's starred in Lincoln, might say, well, how do I compare to Tom Hanks in, I don't know, Forrest Gump or something? So maybe that's a little too old a movie, but you get the idea. I mean, Lincoln's not that new either. So basically, so you can, so Daniel Day-Lewis got paid 20 million and Tom Hanks got paid 20 million. I don't know what the truth is. I'm just making this up. So basically, so Daniel Day-Lewis says, well, my performance in Lincoln was better than Tom Hanks's, input, it's not income. My performance in Lincoln was better than Tom Hanks's performance in Forrest Gump, but we're paid the same. I'm just making this up. I don't really know if it's true or not. Please don't quote me. So in that case, we're paid equally, but it's unfair because I had more input. So the ratio, I don't know if I can draw a line between the equal sign, but let's pretend oh yeah, there we go. So the ratio is not equal because my input's greater. I had better performance than Tom Hanks, but I got paid the same. And you're free to disagree with me. I don't know that Tom Hanks's performance in Forrest Gump was any better or worse than the other one. I'm just saying this. So basically, if it's not equal, then you're going to react to it. So what Daniel Day-Lewis might say is, I'll never work for that studio again, or I'm never going to act again. I'm going to somehow resolve the dissonance between my perceived. Now, remember, this is a social perception. So, like picture yourself working in a office and there are two analysts working side by side. One puts in extra time and works very hard. The other one, does an adequate job, but doesn't really work hard. And then it comes time for a raise. And the second one, who doesn't work that hard, gets a higher raise. Well, the first one's going to get very upset. So so basically what that's saying is that this, I have to take this off. So what this is saying is that, this not equal sign results in what might be called cognitive dissonance, okay, mental discomfort, that you feel a conflict between what you think is right and what you're observing in the real world. People don't like that. So if you think something's unfair, you work to resolve it. So what the guy might do, the guy that worked hard and got the lower raise, might decide to quit or not work as hard, or sabotage his friend. So sometimes it's a mental adjustment. It could be either a mental or a physical. So they might quit and do something in the real world, or they might sort of adjust their attitude and say, well, I really know that this other guy's a genius and I'm a dummy, so it's only fair that I work hard. So a lot of people experience things. I mean, that gets back to self-efficacy theory in a way, because I think a lot of the times when people feel a lack of self-efficacy, it's because of inequities in their lives. It may not be, the usual kinds of things that people talk about, but it could be, but it could also be stuff like, they had a mean parent, or they were abused as a child, or or it could also be stuff like discrimination, or assumptions about somebody for one reason or another. And so the reduction in self-efficacy can come about from the inequity, which is, I think, an important long-term concept. But in any case, equity theory predicts that if things are unequal, you're going to experience cognitive dissonance, And you're gonna then try to resolve the cognitive dissonance either physically or mentally or emotionally. All right, so this chapter 8 talks a lot about some basic models, and I'll talk about them quickly. The job characteristics model was created by Hackman and Oldham, and it involves assuming that it's based on Hertzberg, and it involves assuming that how interesting the job is, it will affect people's motivation. So they argue, they kind of make Hertzberg a lot clearer, and they say that it's not just that the job is interesting, but there's 3 dimensions. There's actually 5 dimensions: skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. And each of these will interact. So you have the motivating potential score being the sum of skill variety, how many skills you use, task identity, are you working on the whole task rather than just part of the task. Task significance, how meaningful is the task? You sum those, divide by 3, and then multiply the result times autonomy times feedback. So that's the motivating potential score. Autonomy means how much control you have over yourself. Feedback means, are you hearing from someone else how your performance is? And so your job is motivating to the extent that these variables interact. The way that Hackman and Oldham argue, that what they say is that you need to restructure the job to increase motivating potential. So you do things like, they follow Hertzberg to a degree, and they say you need to vertically download responsibility from the higher levels to the lower levels. So vertical downloading of job responsibilities makes the job more interesting. And so that will help motivate people. You can also consolidate tasks. So you form natural work units and you create a whole task. And so people work on building a whole car rather than on components of the car. And you also open up feedback channels so that people talk to the people that use their product, their output, and so get a clear idea as to whether they're doing a good job or not. You also create autonomous work units. So you basically, you allow the employees to select their team leader, and the team leader functions as the supervisor. So there are a lot, in other words, giving this kind of flexibility will make the work more interesting and fun for the employees. They're basically in charge of each other instead of having a boss and having to do things the boss's way. They decide for themselves. In some Japanese companies, they even have the employees do the time and motion studies on each other. So that, in other words, they set the work standards. They learn they're taught how to do time and motion study, and then they set the work standards for each other, rather than have an outsider do it. I can imagine that that's actually going to be somewhat stricter than if you have an outsider do it. So basically, some of the ways that you can improve the interest of the work is that you can redesign the jobs, have job rotation, have people work in different jobs. Job enrichment means that you redesign the jobs to make them more interesting. Relational job design focuses on employees whose lives, it focuses on people's whose lives are affected by the job. And so you show images of people who've been helped by the work. So you show pictures of clients, patients, other employees, and seeing pictures of or meeting beneficiaries firsthand allows employees to see their actions affecting real people. That's why I'm always glad when a student says something I did help them in some way. All right, so basically, there are a lot of new approaches to work, that work is changing. We've talked about the gig economy. A lot of this isn't that new. Flex time, increasing numbers of jobs allow you to work part-time or at different times. More and more people are telecommuting, especially since COVID, as you know, I don't have to tell you. This has affected, just as an aside, this has affected the real estate market a great deal. There's a lot of empty office space in New York and elsewhere, and a lot of the commercial property investors are pulling their hair out trying to decide what to do with office buildings that are not as full as they once were. Some of them will probably be turned into apartment buildings because people are not working on site as much. As of 2018, so this is prior to the pandemic, 46.5% of people with bachelor's degrees worked at least some of the time from their home. Obviously, the number is bigger now, so it's a pretty big share of the workforce. So I imagine many of you will be doing that. Okay, the idea of employee involvement and participation. Employee involvement is sometimes called EI, or it could be called EIP, employee involvement and participation, uses employees' inputs to increase their commitment. So some examples include participative decision-making, where the employees give their formal or informal input to help decide management questions. It improves trust. In Germany, they've long had what's called Mitbestimmung. My wife's German speaking, so she's going to laugh at my accent, but basically Mitbestimmung, which means co-determination. So in the German companies, they elect employees to the board, and they have two boards, and the employees are elected. I think it's called the supervisory board. And the employees also have to be consulted when their HR changes. So, you know, in other countries, this idea of co-determination or work sharing is in play in many countries, in some countries anyway. Countries that have high power distance, which include France, China, and India, are not that interested in worker participation. There tends to be less interest in it for obvious reasons. It's almost tautological. So basically, pay is an important motivator. Again, I don't agree with the Alfie Kohn, you know, that stuff I talked about in the beginning, self-determination theory or cognitive evaluation theory. I really don't think it's true. Pay is a performance motivator. Your book acknowledges that. In a SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management survey, 47% of respondents said that they were staying at their job because of their pay. 62% said that they were seeking a job elsewhere because of the pay. So pay is basically the number one reason why people stay at a job or leave the job. You know, obviously, you know, I don't want to be intentionally crass, but you know, I wouldn't work as a professor if I weren't paid. You know, I don't do it for charity reasons. I mean, I'm glad to help people. It's a bonus part of the job, but part of the job is also you have to get paid. Otherwise, you can't pay the bills. It's like crazy to think someone would work without getting paid. So basically, you need, all companies, I talked about HR before, internal and external equity need to be balanced. And so HR does that by, they do market surveys for the outer equity, external equity, and they do job evaluation for the internal equity. All right. Now, there's also, you know, your book goes into some ideas about pay for performance. Japanese firms tend to not use merit pay. Merit pay the idea of merit pay is that you're given a raise based on how well you did. So your boss kind of uses a form. I was just talking about this, and I was doing performance appraisal today in my HR class, and basically merit pay is based on the performance appraisal. So you get a raise. A lot of you probably get this at your jobs. So Japanese firms have traditionally used seniority until about 20 years into careers. But some of the firms have been getting more into merit-based pay. Globally, according to your textbook, about 85% of firms use some form of performance-based pay. So it used to be Americans were unique in that way, and there were firms that tried to export American practices years ago that were prevented from doing so because of pay regulations in Europe and elsewhere, South America as well. But I think the global marketplace is becoming more open-minded about pay for performance. Another big issue is pay secrecy. A lot of companies don't want employees to talk about what they're paid, and I can tell you why. Because a lot of the pay rates are out of whack. It's not because of corruption or anything. Part of it's that like people who are there for a long time get paid a lot, and like sometimes like people are really working hard, haven't been there a long time, and they see these higher rates of people who don't work as hard as they work, and things like that. And obviously it's not going to make them happy. I just said equity theory. So a lot of firms like to keep pay rates quiet. And that's pay secrecy. And they may even say they'll fire you if you talk about pay. There are a lot of firms that do that. All right. So basically some types of pay for performance are piece rates. Piece rates are incentive plans where you're paid per piece. So like you're paid $1 a shirt. So if you produce a shirt, you get paid $1. And if you produce 20 shirts, you get paid $20. One of the early proponents of the piece rate plan was Taylor. I think I talked about scientific management earlier in the semester, and Taylor believed in a two-step piece rate plan, 2 pieces to the piece rates. In the first step, the employees are paid a unit per unit amount. If they hit the standard rate, which he arrives at using time and motion study, in other words, he times the employee's work systematically and finds the optimal method of doing something. And then the optimal method is associated with a fixed number of units of output. So he times a lot of people and says, okay, a good worker should be able to produce 20 units a day using the methods I say. What he then said is that if you hit the standard, if you hit 20 and you go above it, you will get a bonus. So let's say there's a $2 bonus, a 10% bonus, and they're paid $1 a piece, 20 pieces, that's $20. They're paid a 10% bonus. So that's an extra $2 if they hit the standard. And then for every piece they produce thereafter, they get $220. So they get a higher rate for those bonus pieces. And so that's going to motivate employees to really work hard to try to get above the standard rate. That's the Taylor method. The big problem with incentives of any kind is unanticipated consequences. If you say to people, in the Soviet Union, this was a big problem. So this guy Berliner published a series of articles that were later compiled in a book. Let me see if I can find it on Amazon, called the Soviet Industry from Stalin to Gorbachev. And he actually spent a lot of time in the USSR. Yeah, here it is. So I'll show you that. It's probably hard to get. It's out of print or something, but I'll show you the book. So share screen, share. Okay, so this is the book. Oh, you can get it. You can get it used for only $5.97. I don't expect anyone to actually get it, but if you want to learn about what industry is like under socialism and how inefficient it is, this is a great source because he studied it firsthand for many decades. And one of the things that would happen, they would use scientific management. They copied it from us, and they used incentives. They had no qualms about using incentives. This thing that in socialism there are no incentives is false. The Soviets use them heavily, and I'm sure the Chinese do too. I was there. I was in China, and I actually met the head of he wasn't the head. He was like second in command, I think, of the electric company in Guangzhou. And I had dinner with his daughter was my guide, so I could have asked him a lot of questions, and unfortunately I didn't. But I'm sure they use incentives in those firms, in these communist firms. But the problem is that incentives are useless unless you target the right thing. And it's very, very hard to target because you never know. There's always unanticipated consequences of any policy, whether it's a government policy or a corporate policy. There's always unanticipated consequences. So, just as an example, that was very famous in the 1980s, is that a factory manager is told, well, you normally ship 5,000 shoes. If you can increase that shipment to 10,000, we'll pay you a bonus. So the motive becomes to ship more shoes out of the shoe factory. But what this manager did, and this is a true story, was that the factory only produced left shoes. So they produced one side shoe, and then the next month they produced the other side shoe. So this creates huge inventory costs and all kinds of inefficiencies, matching the shoes and so on. This would not be possible in a free economy. I'm not saying that American industry has the greatest quality. In fact, I'm the first to say that a lot of the products we buy in our economy are not good quality, but nothing that bad would ever occur in a free economy. That's way beyond anything imaginable. So basically, that's the problem with socialism, is that there are no markets. So the customer can't say no. The customer, it's an administered thing. It's like, I can't, I lost my keys by accident, and I have to get new keys to get into my classrooms, and I can only get it from Brooklyn College, and it takes them 3 months to make me a key. So like if I go to a market situation, I can get the key in 5 minutes, but because there's just one locksmith at Brooklyn College, it takes several months to get the key. And that's exactly what happens under a socialist system. So basically, incentives are important, but you have to be extremely careful of unanticipated results. I talked about merit pay, and that's the way most people are rewarded. The great quality guru, W. Edwards Deming, was a huge critic of merit pay. He did not believe in it. He argued that it's a deadly disease. He had this list of deadly diseases that things like lack of constancy of purpose and short-term thinking. And one of the chief ones was merit pay. And he felt it created political behavior, that people focused on manipulating the boss and not on teamwork, things like that. So How do I clear this? This way? Okay. So W. Edwards Deming, and we don't have time to go into his ideas, but I would say his ideas are very elegant and in many ways an important, I won't say they're more important than a lot of stuff we're talking about, but they're an excellent complement to a lot of these ideas. I think part of the reason his ideas weren't more widely adopted is that we've lived in a world of very short-term thinking, and he opposed, you can't do what he advocates with short-term thinking. You have to think long-term and create systems that are very stable. And the tech companies and the kind of manufacturing that Americans have done has been subjected, first of all, they've offshored a lot of it, and they don't even control the manufacturing anymore. So a lot of the products just, there's no control at all. And then in a lot of them, they don't really care about the quality of the products. What they care about is like having something new and impressive and, things that people will be excited about, and the quality is very secondary. So, and I could talk about that kind of thing all night. I think it's related to the money supply, in all honesty. I think having very low interest rates for a long time creates short-term thinking. The two are very closely related. That's fixation on the stock market. Whereas like in a more stable economy with higher interest rates, people think longer term. But that's a story for another day. So basically, a couple more things. Your book talks a little bit about flexible benefits. That's the idea that a company allows the employees to pick among several benefit packages. So you can pick a bigger medical plan and less vacation, or more vacation and a smaller medical plan. The idea of ESOPs fables. Actually, they're not fables. ESOPs are employee stock ownership plans. And a number of companies have adopted them. And the idea is just that you distribute stock to the employees. Now, they are not substitutes for retirement plans. Okay. So if a company has an ESOP, it should be supplemental to a retirement plan. At least part of the employee's assets should be in diversified portfolios. Okay, I worked as an expert witness on a case against Enron, the large oil and gas pipeline company that went bankrupt. It was more, I think, more natural gas company that went bankrupt in 2001, I think it was, and was involved in huge fraud and other things. And one of the big problems was that they had told all their employees to put their money into the Enron stock. And they were doing this even when they knew that there were real problems with the company, but they were still telling them to do it. And meanwhile, the executives were taking their money out of the fund without telling the employees. At the same time, they were telling the employees to put their money into the fund. I don't have to tell you what that is. That's, I can't conjure words for that. But anyway, moving into group behavior, we still have about 40 minutes, so we can get into this. A group is just two or more individuals who interact, who come together, who serve a goal. Okay, they want to achieve objectives. So like if there's a group of people in a subway and no one knows each other and they're never going to see each other again, that's not what your textbook means by group. Okay, a group has some goal, some purpose. They're trying to achieve an objective. And groups have certain properties. This has been studied since the 1930s. This goes back to the Hawthorne experiments in the 1930s, when a group of psychologists, I guess they were psychologists, sociologists at Harvard Business School, were looking at the employees in a subsidiary of AT&T called the Hawthorne Electric Plant. And it was actually Western Electric. In other words, the Hawthorne plant belonged to Western Electric, which was a subsidiary of AT&T. And basically they were doing experiments on a lot of things, and they had controls, but they didn't anticipate that observing the test subjects would change the nature of the test. So in other words, they thought that they could just change the lighting, make their presence known to the employees, and their presence wouldn't affect the employees. But it would only be the lighting that affected the employees. But in fact, what they realized later was that their presence was far more important than the lighting. Okay, so they were looking at a lot of things, not just lighting, but they had this insight with the lighting. So they realized that, first of all, that you can't do experiments without worrying about how the experiment is changing the reality of the test subjects. Okay, and this is true in all fields. It's true, incidentally, in medicine. I don't think I agree with this, but I read in a newspaper recently that there are scientists now who are claiming that the placebo effect is more important than the actual medication. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. But there are. I mean, I'm not saying the placebo meaning when biologists or medical practitioners experiment with drugs, it's the same idea as the Hawthorne effect. They give the actual drug to the test group, and then they give a substitute, a make-believe drug or a placebo to the control group. And it's only if the test group exceeds the placebo effect. And you have to do the same thing when you do experiments in any social setting. It's not, obviously if it's true for drugs, where your very biology is changing, it's going to be true for moods and emotions and productivity and the type of stuff we're talking about. That's clearly going to be volatile and subject to changes in attitudes. And this was the insight of the Hawthorne experiments. So I don't know if placebo effects are more important than test effects, but they certainly will play a role, and they can be quite large. They could be for short times as large as the intended test effect. So, for example, I once did some work on I wrote a book actually on wellness plans many years ago, and I looked at the test subjects in these experiments that the wellness people studied were given a wellness plan, and there was no control group. And then they control from that wellness plans increase productivity. And that I saw that experiment multiple times in the public health literature. And this is a real problem. This is not a good thing, because basically, if I hand, I have a banana here, here's my banana. If I say to everyone in the class, I'm going to give you a banana every time you get a right answer, that might motivate people for a while to give right answers. In fact, there's a famous story about that. I think it was Emerson Electric. I'm not sure. It was like a famous company. When it was first founded, the head of the company was trying to solve a problem with some product that they were just going to they were initially marketing, and it was a really hard problem. And one of the engineers came up with the solution, and he comes to the manager, and he's so happy, he's crying, and he wants to give him a reward. So he doesn't know what to give him, and he gives him he has a banana on his desk just like this, and he gives him the banana. He says, "Thank you." And basically, then from then on, in that company, I think it's Emerson Electric, but I have to check. They have a golden banana and they have a pin and they award the engineer of the year who came up with the best idea with the golden banana. And so, but this of course becomes more meaningful. It's like, you know, a status symbol, you know, and so basically anything could be a reward. You know, anything really could be a reward when you think about it. But anyway, groups have characteristics, and people have roles in groups, they have norms. The idea of norms is that there are standards of behavior. So basically, norms would be, for instance, I talk and you listen.
I'm gonna let you do that. But remember, you're not getting a lot.
What? I'm sorry. I guess that was
I
just,
apologize, Professor. I'm so sorry.
oh, okay. No problem. I just sometimes these things get loose or something. So anyway, people have certain norms, like you apologize because you were talking. It just illustrates what I was talking about. So, you know, I don't apologize because I'm talking. You apologize because you're talking, because like the norm of the class is that the professor talked. But if I'm like in another setting, let's say I take a seminar with some investment guy or something, then the norm is I listen and they talk. You know, it's like everything is based on norms and expectations. And if you violate the norms, then all hell breaks loose. Okay, so when people say things that violate norms, then people get upset. Now, of course, different people have different norms. And, you know, that's why early in the history of the United States, there were 13 states, and each one had a different religion. There were state religions. I don't know if you knew that. So like Quakerism was like the religion of Pennsylvania. And that's why they call Philadelphia the city of brotherly love. It's named after the Quakers. They use that term. And Maryland was Catholic and Massachusetts was Protestant. It was initially Congregationalist, and then it became Unitarian later. And so basically all these different states had different religions. And how do you make that work? The only way you can make it work, of course, is to say the federal government will not establish a religion. Okay, so, you know, New York was run by the Church of England, Episcopalians, and Massachusetts was run by Unitarians and so on. And so the only way you could make that work is say Congress shall pass no law respecting the establishment of a religion. And so you have tolerance of all religions. Now, of course, that broke down as there got to be more diversity over the 19th century and, you know, so on. So basically that changed. But the idea, the insight that you have to be, if you have a group of groups, there has to be tolerance of alternative norms, was an important insight, important breakthrough. And you can't have world peace, of course, without that tolerance of alternative norms. So basically, group status includes things like roles. Different people play different roles. Sometimes there's a leader, there's followers, there's a group comedian. All groups have statuses. So, you know, the big leader has the highest status. So in higher ed, the person who publishes the most might have the most status, and the person who has the most academic citations might have the most status, or, you know, something like that. The size of the group plays a role, a big role. A smaller group is going to be more cohesive, a larger group less so. The dynamics of the group are going to matter, and also how cohesive the group is. Excuse me, how much it sticks together. So basically, there are formal and informal groups in any company. A formal group is on the organizational chart. So, you know, the organizational chart is like a pyramid, and you know, and so you have something like this. You've all seen this sort of thing. And, you know, so you have people reporting to the top honcho up there. So you have 3 vice presidents, and then each one of those has 3 managers. So this is the formal organizational chart. Sorry about that, but you get the idea. And so on. So there might be 3 or 4 levels, and the Roman military was organized like this early in its history. So basically, that's the formal organization. And Fayot, the famous French industrialist who wrote a book called Administration, Fayol. I shouldn't use this for writing because it's awkward. But anyway, Fayot said that there's often a bridge between 2 people at the same level, or even people at different levels. And that's called Fayot's bridge. That, in other words, there's an informal organization that doesn't exist on the chart. And that can often be more important. If you watch the movie 12 Angry Men, which I show in my other class, I'm not going to show it to you, but I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. The jury starts out, there's a foreman played by Martin Balsam, juror number 1, and he's okay, but he's not, he's nothing special. But the juror number 8, played by Henry Fonda's got like a lot of ideas, and they all think the guy is guilty, and he convinces them. So basically, he comes up with a lot of ideas and opens up a lot of discussion. So he kind of becomes the informal leader of the group. That's the idea. And this often happens in real life. You've probably seen it with your friends. You might have a group of friends, and somebody becomes the informal leader, and people put a lot of weight in what they have to say, and so on. Okay, so basically, social identity theory it's an interesting idea. Why do individuals consider themselves parts of groups? Why do you consider yourself part of one group and part of another group? Because your self-esteem gets tied to the group. So you somehow relationally identify, in part because of roles you've been assigned, in part because of family relations, and your identity gets tied to a group. And the same thing occurs with organizations, that we get tied and connected with the organization. In the movie 12 O'Clock High, initially they feel a lot of disconnect with the organization, but because he tightens up the organization, has them change roommates, creates more of a sense of mission and discipline, that kind of causes them to start to identify with the group. And that's different from the idea when he talks about Davenport, and he says over-identification with the men. That's a different idea. So here it's like the men being identified with the group. So we all have these kinds of identifications, and it's an interesting question. Why do we choose the groups we choose to identify with? Why did Democrats choose to be Democrats and Republicans choose to be Republicans, et cetera, et cetera? All right, so basically, in groups versus out groups, a very important idea. There's always going to be in groups, okay, people who are favored by the hierarchy, and everyone's goal is to be one of the in group. And that's fairly obvious. I knew a gal when I was in college whose father was a member of the Skull and Bones Society at Yale. He was a well-known writer. He wrote for the New Yorker. His name was Brendan Gill. And I met him a couple of times, and I saw him interviewed in a movie. And he said in the movie, well, there's 2 types of people, the insiders and the outsiders. And everyone wants to be an insider. And, he's sort of like smirking because he's obviously an insider. But I don't know that everyone wants to be an insider. I never really felt that compulsion. To me, it just seems like a lot of narcissism. But I think to be successful in an organization, you need to you need to be an insider. So in other words, you have to ingratiate yourself to the inside, and you have to learn to network. And if you're not good at networking and selling yourself to other people, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage in getting ahead, because that's really what everything depends on. I'm not saying that Bill Gates wouldn't have been Bill Gates without, a huge amount of ability. But the simple truth is, it was his mother who got him the meeting with IBM that enabled him to sell them DOS early on. So in other words, he was an insider. And it was Steve Ballmer's friendship with Bill Gates that brought him into Microsoft and made him one of the richest people in the country. He's in I think, Forbes 100 also. As well, Steve Allen, who worked with Gates. I don't know who is more responsible for the early success of the company. They were both very talented, but they probably keyed off each other. And a lot of the more innovative stuff they did was when Steve Allen was there. When he left, I'm not saying, Microsoft's obviously been a huge success thanks to no small part to Gates's ability. I don't mean to minimize it, but at the same time, I don't think it would have happened in the same way or to the same degree if he hadn't been to some degree an insider. Now, I'm not saying you can't succeed without those kind of advantages by any means. I don't believe that, but I am saying that it's going to be a lot more likely to succeed if you develop the skill at becoming an insider in some way. So that's a lot to think about. All right, now your book talks about the punctuated equilibrium model of group formation. And the idea is that the first meeting sets the group. So this is like a group that gets together. You work on a project with your friends at school, with your classmates, or maybe you're at work and you're designing a new packaging for a product or some such thing. And basically, so the first meeting, you set the group's direction. And you start to experience some inertia. Halfway through the process, there's a breakthrough and major changes. The transition follows the inertia, and then there's a little more inertia, and the last meeting accelerates activity. So there's a lot of activity at the end, which leads to more of an output and more of an outcome. And they call that the punctuated equilibrium model. That's a funny term because it's used in biology. It's got a slightly different meaning. And it's also been used a lot in org theory and strategy. It comes from biology, and what apparently happens in biology is that species evolve very quickly and then reach a plateau for long periods of time, and then they evolve quickly again. It's probably due to some kind of geological event or mass extinction event or weather issue or something like that that causes these rapid evolutionary changes. But the idea is that there's a equilibrium followed by a rapid change followed by an equilibrium. That's the argument about punctuated equilibrium and evolution. And your book is kind of using that term to refer to group formation. So an alternative model that you can also talk about is forming, storming, norming, and performing. And so in the forming stage, people meet each other. In the storming stage, they debate who's going to be the leader and what the norms are going to be. In the norming stage, the norms are formulated, and then finally the group performs. Role perception and role expectations are also, again, this gets back to Irving Goffman, I mentioned before, who wrote the book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And basically, the idea is that in an individual's view of how to act in a situation is their perception of their role. So how you act in a given situation depends on your perception of how to act. It's not that you do what you really feel, it's that you do what you perceive is necessary given your role, and that could be very different. Here, let's look at this. So I would say the Goffman's book is well worth reading. It's well worth reading, and you'll get a lot of insights about yourself and about the people around you. And so here, presentation of self in everyday life. So here's that book. It's easy to read. It's not a hard book or anything. It's well worth the read. So basically, people also have role expectations. So part of the reason I teach the way I do is that the students expect me to teach this way. I would teach differently, given my orientation and philosophy of teaching, but I can't do it because the students expect me to teach in a certain way. So basically, in any profession, you're constrained as to how to act, in part by your own perception of how to act, but also in part on how others believe you should act. And both play a role, okay? If you violate those role expectations, you're going to learn about it very quickly. Okay, as I said, norms are acceptable standards of behavior shared by members of the group that express how they feel. There's a great impulse in humanity to conform. People seek acceptance. So there's considerable evidence that groups strongly pressure people to meet their standards. There was a great book written early in the history of social science. It's still one of the really best books about this. It's related. It's not really about groups. It's called The Crowd. And it's about how crowds work together. And what we have in modern world with mass media is an intent. Gustave Le Bon wrote The Crowd in the 1890s, and he could see the mass mind at work then. And this was before the rise of totalitarianism, but totalitarianism pretty much confirms everything. He predicted it, basically. And he's basically saying that groups tend to be vicious. They tend to think in simple-minded ways. They tend to be emotional. And basically, he suggests that they're easily manipulated, and the rise of modern propaganda and all the hatreds of the 20th and 21st centuries, all of these things work together to create this mass mind. It's the same thing when you talk about small groups, and a scholar who it's hard to show this in large groups because it's hard to perform natural experiments with like millions of people. You can't really do it, but with small groups you can, and it's really the same thing. So this tendency to be tribal and to think in tribal ways with a unitary mind is characteristic at a small group level, and it's transferable easily to a large group level. And when it's a large group, it can be much more violent and sudden and stuff, but small groups can be the same. So basically, what Solomon Asch did is I'm sorry, I keep changing this. I'm trying to, he showed cards with 3 lines to his test subjects. And it looks something like this. I can't remember the exact format, but it was something along these lines. So so it'd be like 1, 2, 3. And he'd have a bunch of these cards with different lines being shorter. So, I mean, this is such a simple question that without exaggeration, a monkey could figure it out. A chimpanzee could actually do this, which line is shorter. They have chimpanzees speaking like a few hundred words now, and they could figure this out with no problem. So basically, any human being is able to do this. And so what Ash did was he planted a group of people around the table. All of them were part of his experiment. They knew what to say. But the one test subject thought they were like him. He thought they all came in, they were all students, they were all being experimented on together. And there was only one of them who really was. The rest of them were acting. They knew what to say. They were part of the experiment. And so they put the guy down in the middle, and then at first they'd say 2 is shorter. And the first one would say, okay, and then suddenly they would say 1 is shorter or 3 is shorter, and they'd all say the same thing. And he wanted to see what percentage of the test subjects would go along with the group. And basically he found that between 30 and 60% would go along with this. Of course, this is so straightforward, it's like an embarrassment. I mean, there's nothing simpler than this in life. This is, as simple as it gets. So basically, if you have more complex things, obviously the percentage is higher. And so what Ash showed is that people will conform and parrot what they're told. So I would say, as a result, that pretty much everything you hear in the public sphere is a certain kind, you might call it virtue signaling, or you might just call it conformity. But there's very little in the media or day-to-day life that doesn't have this kind of attribute. And certainly in a corporation, a lot of the people you deal with, they're going to, be the type to say number 2 if that number 3 is shorter. I'm sorry if everybody else says so. So basically, you have a choice. You can either call them on it and get fired, or go along with it and say 3 is shorter. And, if you're smart, you'll do what, most employees do and go along with the peccadillos of the organization they're in. But I mean, it's true in society at large. All societies have these biases and opinions, and it's really impossible to argue with it. So basically the idea is that people conform to reference groups, the important groups to which they belong, and they're heavily influenced by cultural norms. Okay,
So-
status
Sorry.
also, yeah. We have.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna say, so in essence, there's no real change from what basic sociology talks about, how general society works, and organizational kind of research on how corporations work internally. I'm guessing the only real difference is just there's an actual structure to it to some degree, like an actual visible structure, and people's behaviors don't really shift outside of that. So CEO or whoever other leadership kind of sets certain tones, but it seems that people still move as we expect people to move generally.
Yeah, so the CEO will have much more influence on the rank and file than the reverse. But there are going to be times when the CEO will adopt the norms of the lower people. If it's not something they have a vested interest in, people are acting in a certain way, the top manager will just pick it up and copy it. You reminded me of, there's a scene in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. I don't know if you ever saw that. It's an old movie about a guy who's very unhappy in life, and at one point he designs a swimming pool that opens up, and his old high school puts it in their gym, and somebody tricks him and opens up the swimming pool, and everybody's they start jumping in the swimming pool, and the principal's sitting at at the top, like looking at everyone and screaming at them, don't jump in, don't jump in. Then finally, like everyone else jumped in, so the principal jumps in too, and basically I think that often happens in companies that like the top management will pick up the norms of the people they deal with as well as the other way around. I don't think it's just a one-way street. But yeah, the hierarchy changes it a little, but basically it's not that different from the way the world is in general. Does that answer your question?
It wasn't really a question. It's more of an observation so far from what we've been talking about. But yeah.
Yeah, good. Very good point. Okay. All right. So basically, studies of high status people find that they're more likely to deviate from the norms of the organization if they don't identify with the group and are able to resist conformity pressure easily. Okay, so I think people who are high in status or maybe also very low in status have less trouble not conforming, whereas people in the middle range be more conforming. Okay, so basically seeking to attain status leads to being more vocal, giving more criticism, and using more jargon. And if someone has high status, they'll often not show it off. Okay, so those are all interesting findings. Okay, group size is very important. Groups with 12 members are good for gaining diverse output, for idea generation. And basically, the more people, the better for idea generation. Larger groups are better. But smaller groups are more cohesive and will have more trust. You should have heard the term social loafing. The idea of social loafing is that people tend to expend less effort when working in a group. So if you have a team, there might be 3 people who do very little, 1 person who does a lot. To the extent that someone is very conscientious and has a strong work ethic, they will not engage in social loafing. Basically, if you have clear goals, you increase competition within the group, you have peer evaluation, you have members who have high motivation levels, so you're selective about who gets into the group, and you reward based on contributions. All those things will reduce social loafing. Okay, cohesion means that the group works as a unit. They spend time together, they have a history. And so basically, the more a group is together, the closer they are, the greater proximity, the more history. If there's an external threat, they pull together. And if they're small in size, they will have more cohesion. The assets and liabilities of group problem solving. A guy named Norman Meyer wrote an article in the 1960s, the assets and liabilities, very good article. And he says in there that there are certain strengths and assets of group decision-making, and these include more information. You get more information from groups. Obviously, 2 heads are better than 1, if you will. There's increased diversity of views. So group diversity can also play a role. And if you look at that movie, 12 Angry Men, you see they're all white, but there's a lot of diversity from different social classes and things like that. And that contributes. So like one guy's from a poor background and he's seen a knife fight. So he can talk about what happens in a knife fight. And other people, have other experiences and, can basically. So if you have more diversity, you have more information. And groups, if somebody's in a group that makes a decision, they're more likely to accept the decision. All right, so the liabilities of group decision making, clearly it takes more time. We're witnessing this now with the Speaker of the Congress. I was going to say State Assembly. The Speaker of the Congress got fired, and they have to pick. The Republicans have to pick a new one. and they're all fighting with each other and it's taking a lot of time. I think a bigger problem in most corporate groups, I'd say probably the biggest problem, is the conformity pressure. So, what we were just talking about. So because the main asset of groups, this gets back to Meyer's article, the main asset of groups is better information and more problem-solving approaches, more ways to solve problems and more information. If you have a lot of conformity pressure due to natural human tendency to think in a herd, that or think as a tribe, if you will, that basically conformity pressure will destroy the advantages of the group. So that's very important. Equally important is dominance by an individual. So if there's one really strong person who leads, they might stamp out disagreeing viewpoints, and that'll destroy the advantages of the group. Meyer argued that a lot depends on the quality of the leader, that a good leader of a work group, or, and you might see this if you watch 12 Angry Men, is not someone who imposes their views on the group, but someone who who encourages the group to voice their views. So a good leader is supportive, not dictatorial. So a good leader will get the group to come up with ideas and will function. He uses the term a nerve ring in a starfish. It's like a ring that's at the center of the legs of the starfish, and all the information from the legs go into the nerve ring and they go back into the legs. So the legs will know how to walk. And so basically that a good leader is like that they get the information from all the people in the group and then give it back to the people in the group. They support minority viewpoints. So like if there's somebody, everybody says, oh, the guy's guilty, but one guy says not guilty, a good leader will say, well, why do you think that? And encourage the one dissident to speak out. There are very, very few good leaders in the world. There are very few in business, and there are even less in government. There's very, very few good leaders. And leaders of the kind that would encourage the diversity of views are quite rare. One of these was George Washington. If you look at the history of Washington's administration, he appointed two people who hated each other to the top posts, Hamilton and Jefferson. And he must have known that they hated each other. He couldn't have not known. And basically, Hamilton believed in big government. He believed in centralization. He believed in industry. Jefferson believed in agriculture and small farms and small business, if you will, and freedom. And they basically hated each other. And Washington allowed that, encouraged that to go on. And that's one of the reasons he was a great leader, was that he could deal with that. Very few leaders are willing to do that. What most leaders do is they look for mirror images of themselves. And you can use this. I mean, this is a basis of office politics, that you mirror what the boss is. So you learn to duplicate what the boss says in order to manipulate them. And this is like, if you read Andrew Dubrin's Winning Office Politics, this is how you succeed in business, is by conforming. And, I'm not saying it's just business. In academia, they're the biggest conformist, more conformist than in industry by far. And the same is true in the arts and everything else. I often would say, like, I live near Woodstock, New York, which is like a artists and musicians colony going back 120 years. I often say it's like organized like an army. There's like a hierarchy. All right, so I see we're just about out of time, and I'm only about halfway, a little more, I'd say about halfway through groups. So we'll finish up groups next week and get into the next chapter as well. And I wish you a good night, and I will see you next week. And I think you also have a discussion board due again. And am I mistaken, or is that, I believe that to be the case on, on the aircraft brake scandal. I think that's due tonight. So make sure you take care of that. And I'll see you next time, and if you have any questions, stick around and I'll be glad to answer them.
Is the aircraft scandal the required discussion board?
Yes.
And it's due
next week, right?
What's next week?
Yeah, it's good next week.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay, I thought it was this week.
The
Next
optional
week.
is due to tonight.
Okay, optional is optional, so you don't have to do
Got
it.
it.
If you're
All
here.
right.
you have to do it.
Thank you,
Okay,
Professor.
so that's next week. I'm sorry, the aircraft brake scandal. Okay, have a good night.
Good night,
Good
Professor.
night.
Good night,
Have a good-
Professor.
Night, Professor. Good
I
night,
just wanted
Professor.
to make sure you got me.
Bye,
for-
Professor.
See ya.
Good night. Did you have me for
Charlton,
attendance?
hold
Yeah.
on. I did not, but I will add you. Gotcha.
Thank you, Professor.
Say, you're welcome. Take care and thank you.
Do you have Aaliyah Charlton for the attendance, Professor?
Aaliyah, I did you just a minute ago.
Oh, I think that was Chanel Sterling that was talking to you before.
No, Sterling.
Oh, okay, all right. I think your name was up there, but. All right, so Chanel. Also, all right, you got it.
Thank you. Good night.
All right.
Hey, Professor, could I pick your brain? Well, actually, would it be better for me to email you? I'm doing another project for a class, and I wanted to get your opinion on the paper, if that's all right. If I emailed it to you in a couple of days, would you be able to look at it? Would that be too much to ask?
No, not at all. I'll be glad to.
All right, cool. Appreciate it. I expect the email from me no later than Wednesday.
Okay, we'll be looking for
Thank
it.
you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Anyone else? Other questions? Okay, have a good night. Oh, let me just check this, make sure. What, that's saying this chat thing.